She climbed out of her bedroom window at exactly 12:30 in the morning. 16 years old, honor roll student, daughter, best friend, and she would never climb back in again. This is the story of Skylar Neese, a story of friendship, betrayal, and the darkest secret two teenage girls would desperately try to bury. But here's what they didn't count on. The dead don't stay silent. And neither does the truth. What happened to Skylar Neese on that warm July night in 2012 would expose a horror so unimaginable, so cold-blooded, that investigators who had seen everything would find themselves shaken to their core. Because the monsters who took Skylar's life weren't strangers lurking in the shadows. They weren't dangerous criminals with lengthy records. They were the girls who sat beside her in class. The girls who braided her hair at slumber parties. The girls she called her best friends. Now, before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that every victim deserves to have their story told, if you believe that the truth matters, then hit that subscribe button right now and share this video. Because Skylar's story is one that needs to be heard. One that could save a life. Maybe even yours. Trust me when I tell you, you're going to want to stay until the very end of this one. Let me take you back to Star City, West Virginia. A small, quiet community just outside of Morgantown, where everybody knew everybody and crime was something that happened in other places to other people. It was the kind of town where kids played outside until dark, where neighbors looked out for one another, and where parents slept peacefully at night, believing their children were safe. Dave and Mary Neese were those parents. Working class, devoted, and utterly in love with their only child, Skylar. Dave and Mary began making calls. They reached out to Skylar's friends, her co-workers, anyone who might have seen her. And that's when they discovered the first piece of a puzzle that would take months to solve. Shelia, Eddy told them she'd picked Skylar up the night before. They'd driven around for a while, she said, just hanging out, doing nothing special. Then she dropped Skylar off at the end of the street, and that was the last she'd seen of her. It sounded innocent enough, plausible, the kind of thing teenagers did all the time. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, with no sign of Skylar anywhere, Mary Neese couldn't shake the feeling that something about Shelia's story didn't add up. The police were called. Missing person reports were filed. Volunteers combed through woods and fields. Skylar's face appeared on flyers stapled to telephone poles and taped to store windows throughout Star City and beyond. The community rallied, searching, hoping, praying for a miracle. But miracles weren't coming. Not for Skylar. Not anymore. What no one knew, not the police, not the volunteers, not Skylar's devastated parents, was that the answer to this mystery was hiding in plain sight. The truth was right there, smiling for the cameras, offering condolences, wearing the mask of grieving friendship. And beneath that mask was a secret so dark, so calculated, so utterly devoid of humanity, that when it finally came to light, it would shake the very foundations of everything people thought they understood about friendship, about trust, about the capacity for evil that can exist within the hearts of children. Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf knew exactly what had happened to Skylar Neese. They knew because they had made it happen. They had planned it, executed it, and now they were determined to get away with it. But here's the thing about secrets. They have a way of fighting their way to the surface. And Skylar's story was far from over. To understand how something so horrific could happen, we need to understand the relationships at the heart of this tragedy. We need to peel back the layers of teenage social dynamics and expose the rot that had been festering beneath the surface for months before that fatal July night. Skylar Neese met Shelia, Eddy in elementary school. They were childhood friends in the truest sense, playground companions who grew up together, shared secrets, and navigated the awkward transition from childhood to adolescence side by side. Their friendship was the kind that parents love to see, stable, long-lasting, seemingly healthy. Rachel Shoaf entered the picture later, during middle school. She was different from Skylar and Shelia, more reserved, deeply religious, involved in her church youth group. On paper, she seemed like a positive influence. Someone grounded, someone trustworthy. But appearances, as we'll come to learn, can be devastatingly deceiving. The three girls became a unit, a trio, best friends forever, or so they proclaimed to the world. Social media was their stage, and they performed their friendship for all to see, posting photos, inside jokes, declarations of eternal loyalty. But behind the filtered images and carefully crafted posts, something toxic was taking root. The dynamics of a three-person friendship are notoriously complicated. There's always the risk of two people growing closer while the third is pushed to the periphery. There's jealousy, competition, the constant fear of being left out. And in the months leading up to Skylar's disappearance, these tensions were reaching a breaking point. What Skylar didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Shelia and Rachel had grown closer in ways that excluded her. They had secrets of their own, a bond that didn't include their third friend. And somewhere along the way, in some twisted corner of their minds, they had decided that Skylar was no longer welcome in their lives. But they couldn't just stop being friends with her. That would be too simple, too normal, too human. No, Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf wanted something more final, something permanent. They wanted Skylar Neese gone, forever. The planning began weeks before the murder. Casual conversations that turned dark, hypotheticals that became blueprints. The two girls who should have been Skylar's protectors instead became her executioners in waiting. They discussed how they would do it, where they would do it, what they would do with her body afterward. They spoke of killing their friend with the same emotional detachment most people reserve for discussing weekend plans. And Skylar had no idea. She continued texting them, making plans, confiding in them. She trusted them completely. Why wouldn't she? These were her best friends. The people who knew her better than anyone. The people she believed would always have her back. The cruelty of it is almost too much to comprehend. To look someone in the eye, day after day, knowing you're planning to end their life. To hug them, laugh with them, tell them you love them, all while counting down the days until you'll take everything from them. What kind of person can do that? What kind of darkness must exist within a soul to make such a thing possible? As the weeks passed, small cracks began to appear in the friendship. Skylar noticed that Shelia and Rachel seemed to be spending more time together without her. She noticed whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. She felt the subtle shift in energy, the way they sometimes looked at her like she was an outsider intruding on their private world. But Skylar was a fighter. She wasn't going to let her friendships fall apart without trying to fix them. She reached out more, tried harder, made herself available. She had no way of knowing that her efforts were futile, that the decision had already been made, that her fate had already been sealed by the two people she trusted most in the world. In the days before her death, Skylar argued with Shelia and Rachel. She confronted them about feeling left out, about sensing that something had changed between them. She demanded honesty. She wanted to understand what was happening to their friendship. If only she had known. If only someone had warned her. If only she had listened to the small voice inside that sensed something was wrong and walked away. But Skylar Neese was 16 years old. She believed in friendship. She believed in loyalty. She believed that love could overcome any obstacle. These beliefs, these beautiful, innocent beliefs, would cost her everything. On the night of July 5th, when Shelia's car pulled up outside her window, Skylar climbed in without hesitation. She was going to hang out with her best friends. Maybe they would work things out. Maybe everything would go back to normal. Maybe this night would be the fresh start they needed. Instead, it would be her last night on Earth. The drive started out normally enough. Music playing, conversation flowing. 3 teenage girls in a car on a summer night, the windows down, the world full of possibility. To Skylar, it must have felt like old times. Like maybe things really were going to be okay. They drove for about 30 minutes, leaving the familiar streets of Star City behind and heading toward the rural outskirts of Pennsylvania, just across the state line. The roads grew darker, more isolated. The houses became fewer and farther between until there was nothing but trees and shadows and the endless stretch of empty highway. Shelia pulled the car over at a predetermined spot, a secluded area they had scouted in advance. They told Skylar they were going to smoke, just hang out for a while, watch the stars. It was the kind of spontaneous adventure that teenagers live for, the kind of memory that was supposed to last a lifetime. What happened next would haunt investigators, prosecutors, and an entire community for years to come. The three girls got out of the car. They walked a short distance into the darkness. And then, without warning, without mercy, without giving their friend any chance to defend herself or escape, Shelia and Rachel attacked. They had brought kitchen knives from home, weapons they had carefully selected and hidden, waiting for this moment. And they used them with a violence that defies comprehension. Skylar was stabbed repeatedly, dozens of times. She fought back. She struggled. She screamed into the empty night. But there was no one to hear her. No one to help. Just her two best friends, their faces twisted with something far beyond recognition, taking turns ending her life. The attack lasted only a few minutes, but those minutes contained a lifetime of horror. Skylar looked into the eyes of the girl she loved and saw nothing but emptiness staring back. No remorse, no hesitation, no humanity, just cold, calculated murder. And when it was over, when Skylar's body lay motionless on the cold Pennsylvania ground, Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf went to work covering their tracks. They had planned this part too. Every detail, every contingency. They moved the body, attempting to hide it from view. They gathered their bloody clothes and anything else that might connect them to the scene. Then they got back in the car and drove home. They stopped at a convenience store along the way, cleaned themselves up, bought drinks like nothing had happened. Then they continued on, crossing back into West Virginia, returning to their lives, their homes, their beds. While Skylar's parents slept peacefully, believing their daughter was safe, Shelia and Rachel washed their hands of their crime, literally and figuratively. The next morning, when Mary Neese discovered her daughter was missing, Shelia Eddy answered her phone and delivered her carefully rehearsed story. Yes, she'd picked Skylar up. Yes, they'd driven around. No, she didn't know where Skylar was now. She'd dropped her off at the end of the street, and that was the last she'd seen of her. The performance was flawless. Concerned, but not too concerned. Cooperative, but not suspiciously so. Shelia had practiced this moment in her mind. She had prepared for every question, every probe, every attempt to trip her up. And she played her part perfectly. Rachel was more nervous. Her hands shook. Her voice wavered. The guilt she felt was real, even if it wasn't enough to make her confess. But she held it together. She kept the secret. She pretended to be just as confused and worried as everyone else. And so the investigation began. An investigation that would go nowhere for months, because the two people who held all the answers were also the two people leading everyone astray. Let me pause here and ask you something. Think about your own friendships. Think about the people you trust most in this world. Could you ever imagine them being capable of something like this? Do you really know what darkness might be hiding behind someone's smile? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you think makes someone capable of betraying a friend in the most ultimate way possible? The weeks following Skylar's disappearance were a special kind of torture for Dave and Mary Neese. Every morning they woke with hope, and every night they went to bed with their hearts a little more broken. The police were working the case, but leads were scarce, and the investigation seemed to be going in circles. The official theory was that Skylar was a runaway. Teenagers disappeared all the time, the police explained. They usually turned up eventually, hiding at a friend's house, traveling with a new boyfriend, living on the streets until they got tired and came home. Despite Mary's insistence that her daughter would never run away, despite all evidence suggesting Skylar had no reason to leave, this remained the working assumption. Meanwhile, Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf returned to their normal lives with disturbing ease. They went to school, hung out with other friends, posted on social media. In fact, their online presence during this period would later become crucial evidence, not for what it revealed, but for what it concealed. Shelia, in particular, seemed completely unaffected by her best friend's disappearance. She tweeted song lyrics, posted photos of herself smiling, made jokes and comments about everyday life without any apparent concern for Skylar. It was as if Skylar had never existed, as if their years of friendship had meant nothing at all. But Mary Neese was watching. From the beginning, something about Shelia's behavior hadn't sat right with her. A mother's instinct, perhaps. That inexplicable sense that something was off, even when you can't put your finger on exactly what it is. Mary noticed that Shelia seemed too calm. Too casual. Too unconcerned about a friend who had simply vanished into thin air. She began asking questions, pressing for details, requesting that the police look more closely at the two girls who had last seen her daughter alive. But her concerns were largely dismissed. Shelia and Rachel were teenagers. They were friends of the victim. Why would anyone suspect them of anything sinister? The months dragged on. Summer turned to fall. Fall turned to winter. Skylar's face still stared out from missing person posters, but the urgency was fading. People were moving on. The case was growing cold. And somewhere in those dark Pennsylvania woods, Skylar's body lay undiscovered, exposed to the elements, forgotten by everyone except the two people who had put her there. But guilt is a powerful thing. It has a way of eating at a person from the inside out. And while Shelia Eddy seemed impervious to its effects, Rachel Shoaf was slowly unraveling. Rachel had always been the more sensitive of the two, the more emotional, the one who cried at sad movies and worried about what people thought of her. Carrying the weight of what she had done was destroying her. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't look at her own reflection without seeing a monster staring back. She began dropping hints to friends. Vague, cryptic statements that something was wrong. Something terrible had happened. Something she couldn't talk about. Her behavior became increasingly erratic. She started skipping school, getting into trouble, acting out in ways that were completely out of character for the good Christian girl everyone thought they knew. Her parents noticed. Her teachers noticed. Something was clearly wrong with Rachel Shoaf, but no one could figure out what it was. When asked, she would break down in tears but refused to explain. The secret was killing her, but she couldn't bring herself to let it go. Meanwhile, Mary Neese refused to give up on her daughter. She launched her own investigation, using social media to keep Skylar's story alive. She connected with other parents of missing children. She learned how the system worked and how often it failed. She became an advocate, a warrior, a mother who would stop at nothing to find the truth. It was Mary who discovered that Shelia had changed her story about the night Skylar disappeared. Small details didn't match up. Locations were different. Timelines were off. Every time Shelia told the story, something was slightly wrong. These inconsistencies might have been dismissed as normal memory gaps, but to Mary, they were red flags waving in the wind. She brought her concerns to the police again and again. She demanded that someone take a closer look at Shelia Eddy and Rachel Shoaf. She knew, with the certainty that only a mother can know, that these girls were hiding something, that they held the key to finding her daughter. Finally, investigators began to listen. They started looking more carefully at the evidence. They examined Shelia's tweets, Rachel's behavior, the inconsistencies in their statements. They brought the girls in for questioning, this time pressing harder, looking for cracks in their carefully constructed facades. And cracks were beginning to show. Rachel, especially, was struggling to maintain her composure. The weight of the secret was too much. The guilt too heavy. Something had to give. It was only a matter of time. January 2013. 6 months since Skylar Neese had vanished. 6 months of searching, hoping, praying. 6 months of her parents living in a nightmare from which they couldn't wake. Rachel Shoaf had reached her breaking point. The guilt that had been eating at her since that July night had consumed her entirely. She couldn't function, couldn't pretend anymore. The secret was poison coursing through her veins, and the only way to survive was to let it out. She told her lawyer first, then her parents. Then, finally, she told the police everything. The confession was recorded. It would later be played in court, and those who heard it would never forget the cold, clinical way Rachel described what she and Shelia had done, how they had planned the murder, how they had lured Skylar to that remote location, how they had taken turns stabbing her, counting the thrusts, making sure she was dead. Rachel explained the motive, or what passed for one in her twisted logic. Skylar had discovered a secret about her and Shelia, something they didn't want anyone to know. And rather than face the consequences of that secret coming out, they decided to silence the one person who could expose them. That was it. That was the reason Skylar Neese had died. Not because she had done anything wrong. Not because she had hurt anyone. But because she knew too much. Because she was in the way. Because two teenage girls decided that their secrets were worth more than their friend's life. When Dave and Mary Neese learned the truth about what had happened to their daughter, the pain was unlike anything they had ever experienced. For 6 months, they had held on to hope. They had imagined scenarios where Skylar was alive somewhere, safe, waiting to be found. Now that hope was destroyed forever. But even in the depths of their grief, they found a grim satisfaction in finally knowing. The uncertainty had been its own form of torture. Now, at least, they had answers. Now they could begin the long, painful process of seeking justice for their daughter. Rachel led investigators to the spot where they had hidden Skylar's body. It was a remote area in Pennsylvania, accessible only by trudging through dense woods. After 6 months exposed to the elements, there wasn't much left. But there was enough. Enough to confirm Rachel's confession. Enough to bring Skylar home at last. The discovery of the body changed everything. This was no longer a missing persons case. It was a murder investigation, and prosecutors were determined to ensure that both Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf paid the maximum price for what they had done. Shelia was arrested at school, led away in handcuffs while her classmates watched in shocked silence. Unlike Rachel, she showed no emotion, no remorse. She maintained her innocence even as the evidence mounted against her. She claimed she had nothing to do with Skylar's death, that Rachel was lying, that she was being framed. But the evidence told a different story. Phone records, surveillance footage, forensic analysis, everything pointed to Shelia's involvement. And Rachel's detailed confession left no room for doubt. Both girls were responsible. Both girls were guilty. Both girls would face the consequences of their actions. The arrests sent shockwaves through Star City. People who had known these girls their entire lives couldn't reconcile the smiling teenagers they remembered with the cold-blooded killers they had become. How could this happen? How could children be capable of such evil? These were questions that would be asked for years to come, questions that had no satisfying answers. For Mary Neese, the arrests brought a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the truth had finally emerged. Satisfaction that justice was coming. But also an overwhelming sadness that nothing would bring her daughter back. Skylar was gone. No amount of prison time, no guilty verdicts, no punishments of any kind could change that fundamental, devastating fact. Still, Mary knew that seeking justice was the right thing to do. Not just for Skylar, but for every parent who had ever lost a child to violence. She would fight for the harshest possible sentences. She would make sure the world knew what Shelia and Rachel had done. She would honor her daughter's memory by refusing to let her killers escape accountability. The legal process would take time. There would be hearings and motions and negotiations. But Mary Neese was patient. She had already waited 6 months for the truth. She would wait as long as it took for justice. The legal proceedings that followed were closely watched by the nation. This case had captured public attention in a way few crimes ever did. The idea of teenage girls killing their best friend was so disturbing, so contrary to everything people wanted to believe about youth and innocence, that many struggled to accept it as real. But it was real, and the justice system would have its say. Rachel Shoaf pleaded guilty to second-degree murder as part of a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for her confession and cooperation, she would avoid the possibility of life in prison. She was sentenced to 30 years, with the possibility of parole after 10. Given her age at the time of the crime, 16, this was considered an appropriate sentence by the court. At her sentencing hearing, Rachel addressed the Neese family directly. She apologized for what she had done. She acknowledged that no apology could ever be enough. She spoke of the guilt that haunted her every moment and would continue to haunt her for the rest of her life. Whether these words were genuine or simply another performance was impossible to know. But Mary Neese listened, her face a mask of controlled grief, and said nothing in return. Shelia, Eddy was a different matter entirely. For months after her arrest, she continued to proclaim her innocence. She refused to accept responsibility for her role in Skylar's murder. Her defense attempted to paint Rachel as the sole perpetrator, claiming Shelia had been coerced or manipulated into participating. But the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple people testified about Shelia's behavior in the months after the murder, her callousness, her lack of concern, her chilling social media posts. Forensic evidence placed her at the scene, and Rachel's detailed account of their shared planning and execution left no room for doubt about Shelia's active, willing participation. Eventually, faced with the prospect of a trial that she would almost certainly lose, Shelia changed course. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. Her sentence was life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. She was led away to begin serving her time, still showing no visible emotion, still offering no words of remorse or explanation. The sentencing of both girls marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Justice had been served, at least in the legal sense. Two teenage murderers would spend decades behind bars for their crimes. But for Dave and Mary Neese, the end of the trial was just the beginning of their true ordeal, learning to live in a world without their daughter. The grief that follows the murder of a child is unlike any other. It doesn't fade with time. It doesn't heal. It becomes a constant companion, a weight that never lifts, a wound that never closes. Dave and Mary had lost more than a daughter. They had lost their future, their grandchildren who would never be born, the wedding they would never attend, the phone calls that would never come. Every milestone, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday afternoon was now colored by absence. But in the midst of their grief, the Neese family made a choice. They could let this tragedy destroy them, or they could use it to create something meaningful. They could honor Skylar's memory by fighting for change, by helping other families, by ensuring that what happened to their daughter would never be forgotten and would never happen again. And so a movement was born. Born from pain, born from loss, born from a mother's love that refused to be extinguished even by death. Mary Neese could have retreated into her grief. No one would have blamed her. She had every right to withdraw from the world, to nurse her wounds in private, to let the public attention fade and the story of Skylar's murder become just another forgotten headline. But that wasn't who Mary Neese was, and it wasn't what Skylar would have wanted. In the months and years following the conviction of her daughter's killers, Mary transformed her grief into purpose. She became an advocate for victims' rights, speaking out about the failures of the system that had initially dismissed Skylar as a runaway. She pushed for changes in how police handle missing persons cases, particularly those involving teenagers. Her advocacy led to concrete results. West Virginia passed Skylar's Law, legislation requiring law enforcement to immediately investigate when a juvenile is reported missing, rather than treating them as runaways. No more waiting periods. No more assumptions. Every missing child would be taken seriously from the moment they were reported gone. The law was a victory, a tangible achievement that would protect other families from the delays and dismissals the Neeses had experienced. But for Mary, it was just the beginning. She continued to speak out, to share Skylar's story, to remind the world that behind the sensational headlines was a real girl who had been loved and lost. She also became an advocate for understanding the dynamics of toxic friendships. She spoke to schools, parent groups, and community organizations about the warning signs that a relationship has turned dangerous. She encouraged open communication between parents and teenagers. She urged young people to trust their instincts when something feels wrong in a friendship. These messages resonated with audiences across the country. Mary's authenticity, her raw honesty about her own failures to recognize the danger her daughter was in, connected with parents who feared for their own children. Her story was a warning, but also a call to action. Pay attention. Stay involved. Ask questions. Don't assume that your child's friends are who they appear to be. Dave Neese, meanwhile, dealt with his grief more privately. He supported his wife's advocacy, but preferred to stay out of the spotlight. The loss of his only child had broken something fundamental within him, something that could never be fully repaired. But he found ways to honor Skylar's memory in his own quiet way. He maintained her grave. He shared memories of her with anyone who asked. He held on to the good times, refusing to let her death define her entire existence. Together, the Neeses created a legacy for their daughter that transcended the circumstances of her death. Skylar would be remembered not as a victim, but as a bright, loving girl whose life had meaning. The scholarships established in her name helped other young women pursue their education. The laws passed in her memory protected other families from similar tragedies. The awareness raised about toxic relationships might prevent future violence. This wasn't the ending anyone would have chosen. The Neeses would have traded everything. Every advocacy victory, every law passed, every life potentially saved, to have their daughter back. But since that was impossible, they did the next best thing. They ensured that Skylar's death would matter, that her story would continue to be told, that she would never, ever be forgotten. Years have passed since that July night in 2012. The immediate shock has faded. The media has moved on to other tragedies. Star City has returned to its quiet routine. But the ripples of what happened to Skylar Neese continue to spread outward, touching lives in ways both visible and invisible. Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf remain behind bars, their youth consumed by the consequences of their actions. Rachel became eligible for parole in 2023, having served her minimum sentence. Whether she will be released remains to be seen. Shelia will not be eligible until 2028 at the earliest. Both women will carry the weight of what they did for the rest of their lives, whether they feel genuine remorse or not. The families of the killers have also suffered. Parents who believe they raised good children now live with the knowledge that their daughters are murderers. Siblings carry a burden of shame that isn't theirs but feels inescapable. The circles of pain extend far beyond the immediate victim, touching everyone connected to this tragedy. But from that pain has come purpose, and from that purpose has come change. Skylar's law continues to protect missing children across West Virginia. The awareness raised by her case has led to similar reforms in other states. Parents who heard her story have had difficult conversations with their teenagers. Young people who learned about what happened have looked more carefully at their own friendships. Mary Neese continues her advocacy, though the years have taken their toll. The grief never lessens, but she has learned to carry it alongside hope. She speaks of Skylar with love, sharing stories of her daughter's humor, her kindness, her dreams. She refuses to let the world remember Skylar only as a murder victim. To her mother, Skylar will always be so much more. Dave Neese has found peace in his own way. He takes comfort in the belief that he will see his daughter again someday. He visits her grave regularly, talking to her about everything and nothing, keeping the connection alive across the veil of death. And Skylar herself, her spirit, her essence, whatever you want to call it, lives on in countless ways. In the laws that bear her name. In the lives that have been saved because of the awareness her story raised. In the memories cherished by everyone who knew her. In the determination of a mother who refused to let her daughter be forgotten. This is not a story with a happy ending. There is no way to sugarcoat the tragedy of a 16-year-old girl murdered by her best friends. But it is a story with meaning. A story with purpose. A story that, despite all its darkness, contains seeds of light. Because in the end, the truth emerged. Justice was served. And those who loved Skylar channeled their grief into action that continues to make a difference. Mary Neese often says that Skylar visits her in dreams. Not nightmares about her death, but happy dreams where they're together again, laughing and talking like they used to. In these dreams, Skylar is whole and well and exactly as Mary remembers her. And when Mary wakes, for just a moment before reality sets in, she feels her daughter's presence. Maybe that's just the mind playing tricks. Or maybe it's something more. Either way, it brings comfort to a mother who has endured the unendurable. It reminds her that love doesn't end with death. That the bond between parent and child cannot be severed by any crime, no matter how terrible. Skylar Neese deserved to live. She deserved to grow up, go to college, fall in love, have a family, experience all the joys and sorrows of a full life. That future was stolen from her by people she trusted. That theft can never be undone. But her story will not end with her death. Her story will continue to be told, to inspire, to warn, to protect. Every time Skylar's law saves a child, Skylar lives on. Every time a parent has an honest conversation with their teenager because of what they learned from this case, Skylar lives on. Every time someone thinks twice about the people they call friends, Skylar lives on. And that is the only victory possible in a tragedy like this. Not the victory of resurrection. Not the victory of turning back time. but the victory of meaning, the victory of purpose, the victory of ensuring that a life cut short still matters. Skylar Neese mattered. She was loved, she is missed, and she will never be forgotten. If her story has touched you, if it has made you think about your own relationships or the safety of those you love, please share this video. Spread the word. Let others know about Skylar's law and the importance of taking missing persons cases seriously. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that deserve to be told. Because every victim deserves to have their story heard. Every family deserves justice. And every tragedy has the potential to create change. Skylar Neese was more than how she died. She was a daughter, a friend, a dreamer. And in death, she became something she never imagined. A protector of children she would never meet. A warning to those who might fall prey to toxic friendships. A symbol of the enduring power of a mother's love. Rest in peace, Skylar. Your story will continue to be told. Your legacy will continue to grow. And those who took your life will never escape the truth of what they did. The truth lives on. And so do you.